The Manhole is a creepy story from Japan about a girl who sees her classmate acing strangely on her way to school. One morning, a young Japanese girl named Mai was walking to school. On the way, she happened to see another girl playing at the end of the street. For some strange reason, the girl was jumping up and down. Mai knew that the girl must be attending the same school as her because they were both wearing the same school uniform. When Mai got closer, she saw that the girl was jumping up and down on a manhole cover. Mai was puzzled. She wondered what the girl was doing. Why was she jumping up and down on the same spot like that? Was she insane? Was it a game? As she was jumping, Mai heard the girl muttering to herself, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. As Mai passed by, she recognized the girl. It was Haruka, a quiet and strange girl in her class who was often the target of bullying. Sometimes the other girls in the class would just ignore Haruka. At other times, they would play cruel pranks on her. The teachers knew she was being bullied, but they just turned a blind eye and didn't bother getting involved. Realizing that school was starting in a few minutes, Mai hurried off, leaving the strange girl to her odd game. That day, in class, Mai noticed that there was an empty desk. Haruka hadn't shown up for school. All day, Mai wondered what the girl was up to. When the school bell rang, all the kids streamed out onto the street. Mai walked home and, on the way, she came across Haruka again. The girl was still in the same spot she had been that morning. She was still jumping up and down. Mai walked up to the girl and stopped right in front of her. The girl just kept jumping as if Mai wasn't there. She had a big smile on her face and was saying, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. What are you doing? Asked Mai. Haruka didn't answer and just went on saying, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. I asked you what you were doing, shouted Mai. The girl just ignored her and kept jumping up and down. Mai didn't particularly like or dislike the girl. She remembered calling the girl some cruel names in the past and bullying her along with her other classmates. Who do you think you are? Mai shouted. Answer me when I talk to you. Until that moment, Mai had never hated Haruka like the others did. But the sight of the girl enjoying herself so much and ignoring her so completely filled Mai with anger. You better tell me what you're doing, or you'll be sorry, warned Mai. The girl just went on jumping happily, as if she hadn't even heard Mai's warning. Suddenly, Mai lost her temper and pushed Haruka to the ground. My turn, said Mai, as she took the girl's place and stood on the manhole. Mai jumped up in the air and, at that exact moment, Haruka reached out and removed the manhole cover. Mai fell straight down. The strange girl got to her feet and replaced the manhole cover. Then, with a big smile of satisfaction on her face, she started jumping up and down again. As she jumped, she said 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. The Creature in the Village is a scary story about a young woman who spends the weekend in her cottage and encounters something terrifying. My name is Magda and I'm 26 years old. I work in an office in the city. On weekends, I used to love to get away from all the hustle and bustle and take a trip to the countryside. Luckily, I have a cottage in a small village, which is located right at the edge of the forest. How I used to love to get out of the city and spend the weekend in my little cottage. Why did I stop? Well, I'll tell you. After a hard week at work, I needed a rest, so I decided to get out of town. I went home, packed my bags, threw them in the trunk and drove off. When I arrived in the village, it was late in the evening and I was tired from the long drive. I went straight to bed and fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of my car alarm going off. I looked out the window, but there was nobody in sight. I found my car keys, pressed the button to shut off the alarm. When the awful noise stopped, I lay down again and tried to fall back asleep. All of a sudden, the alarm went off again. I didn't feel like getting up, so I just grabbed my keys and pressed the button again. Everything was peaceful and quiet. 5 minutes later, the alarm went off a third time. Once or twice could have been an accident, but now I was wondering what was going on. Could someone be playing tricks on me in the middle of the night? I got up again and pressed the button to turn off the alarm, but this time, I didn't lay down. I stood at the curtains and watched. After a few minutes, I saw something by the light of the moon. A shadow emerged from the bushes and slowly approached the car. I could just about make out the shape. It was something tall, skinny, and black. The figure reached out with its long, thin arms and knocked on the car. The alarm went off again and, quick as a flash, the dark figure retreated back into the bushes. At that moment, I realized what was going on and began shaking with fear. I turned off the alarm and continued to watch. The thing emerged from the bushes again and slid silently over to the gate. Threw a hand through them and removed the partition holding the gates closed. I was paralyzed with fear and I couldn't move. My mind was overcome by panicked thoughts. What was it? What did it want from me? What was it doing? Would it ever go away? A shiver ran through my body, from my head down to my toes. My mouth was dry and my heart was beating fast. I was so tense, I was gritting my teeth and clenching my hands into fists. I got control of myself and ran down the stairs as fast as my legs would carry me, to the ground floor. I wanted to look for something I could use to protect myself. However, just as I was about to switch on the lights, I suddenly froze in my tracks. The dark figure was at the window. It was pressed up against the glass, staring in, looking to see whether or not there was someone home. I immediately ducked down behind the sofa and peered out. That's when I realized what all these tricks with the car were for. It was trying to lure its victim outside. I could not take my eyes off its hideous face. The skin was the color of ash and covered with wrinkles. Its eyes were small, beady, and completely black. Instead of a nose, there were 2 ragged holes. It didn't have any lips, just 2 rows of sharp, yellow teeth. Its breathing was so heavy and hoarse that it was misting up the window. I just knew it was not going to go away. After standing at the window for a few moments, I heard a rustling noise as it came to the front door. I watched as it tried to push its fingers through the gap under the door. The handle began to twitch wildly up and down. And then the creature emitted a chilling sound. It was not like the human voice. It was a deep, beastly growl, like an angry dog chewing on a bone. I knew that if it heard me, it would keep trying until it found a way to get into the house. I just crouched down behind the sofa, hiding in the shadows and desperately trying not to make a sound. Tears began involuntarily streaming down my face, no matter how much I tried to stop them. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples and I was shaking like a leaf, just waiting for it to end. I don't know how long I cowered there. I must have passed out. When I woke up and looked at the door, the creature was gone. The door was still in place and everything seemed secure. I have never been so relieved in all my life. I ran upstairs and looked out the window. It was light outside and there was no sign of anything wrong. Taking a chance, I grabbed my keys and, without stopping to collect any of my things, I ran out to the car. I jumped in, locked the doors and drove away from the village as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I got back to the city. When I got back to my apartment, I turned on the radio and heard a news report. The announcer said that, in the village, the dead bodies of 2 girls had been discovered. Their corpses had been mutilated and dumped in a swamp. I guess the creature found what it was looking for. The Laughing Man is a scary story about 2 men who go into the jungles of Africa and try to trap a rare species of ape. The man slept for hours and when he woke up, the doctor gave him some food and tried to find out how he had come to be there. "What happened to you?" the doctor asked. "What are you doing all alone out here in the jungle?" "I wasn't alone," the Laughing Man replied. "I came with my partner Jack Hunter. We were on an expedition to find the legendary Waki. That's what the locals call them. A rare species of ape. The Africans say they're intelligent apes, almost as intelligent as a human, maybe even more intelligent. We wanted to capture one and bring it back to civilization to put it on display. It was supposed to make us very rich. We tried to hire a guide to take us into the Valley of the Apes, but none of the locals dared to go there. They were afraid of the apes. We weren't going to let that stop us, so we bought a canoe and headed down the river on our own. When we came to the Valley of the Apes, we made camp. Hunter unpacked the traps and set them up in a clearing in the jungle. We hid in the bushes and watched those traps for 3 whole days, but we caught nothing. The apes were too smart for us. They knew what we were up to. They weren't going to fall for simple traps. Hunter had a better idea. We dug a pit in the clearing. It was 10 feet deep and filled with sharp wooden spikes. Then, we covered it over with branches and leaves and went back to our camp to wait. We didn't have to wait very long. In the middle of the night, we heard a loud scream. A horrible, gurgling animal scream. We rushed out to check on the pit and found a dead ape, impaled on the sharp wooden spikes. We dragged the corpse out and laid it on the ground. We had what we came for, a dead ape, and I wanted to go home. Hunter had other ideas. He wanted to capture a live one. I tried to talk him out of it, but there was no reasoning with him. Nothing I could say would dissuade him. He took out a knife and started skinning the ape's body. As he worked, I nervously watched the jungle around us. It was dark, but I could feel the eyes of the other apes watching us. I couldn't shake the creeping fear that they knew we had killed one of them and the rest would come to take revenge. When Hunter finished skinning the ape, he put on its skin and wore it like a costume. We removed the sharp wooden spikes from the pit and placed a big log across it. Disguised in his ape costume, Hunter balanced on the log and I covered the pit up with branches and leaves again. His plan was to trick one of the other apes into coming closer, so it would fall into the trap. He crouched there on the log and waited while I went back to our camp. It was almost dawn and I was just about to doze off when I heard the scream. I rushed out to check the pit, but it was empty and my friend Hunter was nowhere to be seen. I called out his name, but there was no reply. I searched for hours, but I could find no trace of him. I was about to give up hope when I spotted a figure in the jungle. It was Hunter. He was crouched down under a tree, naked as the day he was born, and he was just staring at me with a blank look on his face. "Hunter!" I cried. "Good Lord! What happened to you? I thought you were dead. Why didn't you answer me?" Hunter didn't say a word. Slowly, he rose to his feet and he just stood there staring at me. And then... ha ha ha, and then... he, and then... he took it off. Ha ha ha. He. The man was shaking and laughing so much, he could barely control himself. His body was racked by spasms of madness. "What do you mean?" the doctor asked. "What did he take off?" Giggling like a maniac, the man struggled to finish his story. Ha ha ha. He. He took it off. Ha ha ha. The ape took off Hunter's skin. The Tribal Skull is a scary story about a man who finds a talking skull. A hunter was out in the forest one day when he came across an odd-looking skull. The hunter said, "What brought you here?" The skull answered, "Talking brought me here." The hunter ran off and told everyone he knew about the talking skull. Eventually, word of the haunted tribal skull got back to the king. He tells the king, "I found a dry human skull in the bush. It asks you how its father and mother are." The king says, "Never since my mother bore me have I heard that a dead skull can speak." The king summons the alkali, the saba, and the deji and asks them if they have ever heard the like. None of the wise men has heard the like, and they decide to send guards out with the hunter into the bush to find out if his story is true and, if so, to learn the reason for it. The guards accompany the hunter into the bush with the order to kill him on the spot should he have lied. The guards and the hunter come to the skull. The hunter addresses the skull. Skull, speak. The skull is silent. The hunter asks as before, what brought you here? The skull does not answer. The whole day long the hunter begs the skull to speak, but it does not answer. In the evening the guards tell the hunter to make the skull speak, and when he cannot, the guards kill the hunter in accordance with the king's command. When the guards are gone, the skull opens its jaws and asks the dead hunter's head, what brought you here? The hunter's severed head replies, talking brought me here. The Red Death is a scary story about a prince who hides in his castle while a terrible plague sweeps across the land. There was a prince named Prospero who lived in a huge castle in the mountains. His servants and courtiers attended to his every whim. The castle had high stone walls and was surrounded by a deep moat. At the entrance, there were giant iron gates and an enormous portcullis over the door. The prince heard rumors that there was a terrible plague sweeping across the land. They called it the Red Death. The disease was highly contagious and whole towns had been wiped out in a single night. Those who were infected suffered from sudden dizziness and sharp pains, and their skin broke out in a red rash. Then, within minutes, blood would start pouring from their eyes, their nose and their mouth until they collapsed, writhing around in unbearable pain and died. As the plague drew nearer, the prince invited 100 of his friends to take refuge in his castle and keep him company. He locked the gates, barred the windows and lowered the portcullis to keep everyone else out. Inside, the prince and his guests laughed and danced and made merry while outside the walls, the poor people suffered and died as the Red Death raged on. To keep his guests entertained, Prince Prospero decided to hold a masquerade ball. He ordered his servants to redecorate 7 rooms, especially for the ball. The first room was painted blue, from floor to ceiling. The second was pink, the third was green, the fourth was orange, the fifth was white and the sixth was purple. The 7th room was completely black. The walls and ceiling were painted black. The carpet on the floor was black. The curtains that hung from the walls were made of black satin. All of the furniture was upholstered in black velvet. On one of the walls, there was a large black clock with a pendulum that swung slowly to and fro, making a loud and monotonous ticking sound. Every hour, the clock would strike, giving a series of loud clangs, like the tolling of a bell. None of the rooms had any lights. In each room, the only illumination came from a blazing fire in the fireplace that cast flickering shadows across all the walls. In the 7th room, the firelight cast such strange and frightening shadows on the walls that very few of the guests were brave enough to set foot inside it. The masquerade ball began in the blue room and the guests were all having fun. Everyone was wearing a mask. The musicians played merry songs while the guests danced. They ate the food and drank the wine that had been laid out on the tables for them. Whenever the clock struck the hour, the musicians would stop playing, the guests would stop dancing and everyone would stand and listen to the dull clanging chime. When the echo of the tolling bell had died away, the guests would move on to the next room and the revelry would begin again. As the night wore on, they moved from the blue room to the pink room, to the green room, to the orange room, to the white room and to the purple room until they found themselves entering the black room. At midnight, the clock began to strike 12 and everyone stopped to listen. As the chimes subsided, the guests became aware of a masked figure standing in the middle of the room. None of the guests had noticed him before. The stranger was tall and gaunt. He was dressed in a dark red cape and his face was covered by a red mask in the shape of a skull. When Prince Prospero caught sight of the figure standing among the guests, he shuddered with anger. "Who are you?" he demanded hoarsely. "How dare you insult me by coming here without an invitation? Leave my castle this minute or I will have you killed." The masked figure made no move to leave. Instead, he stood there, staring at the prince. Just then, an unearthly red light illuminated the black room and the guests became so frightened that they were shaking in their boots. Prince Prospero did not like to be disobeyed. He drew his sword and held it up. "Leave now, or I shall slay you myself," he shouted. The masked figure slowly walked towards the prince, and all of the guests drew back, too afraid to stop him. Standing in front of Prince Prospero, the figure reached up with bony hands and took off his mask. The prince let out a sharp cry and dropped his sword. The guests screamed in horror. Behind the mask, there was no face at all, just an empty black void. All of a sudden, Prince Prospero grew dizzy and he felt sharp pains in his sides. His skin broke out into a red rash and blood started pouring from his eyes, his nose and his mouth. His guests collapsed around him, writhing in agony, and their screams echoed through the 7 rooms. The Red Death had come like a thief in the night, and one by one, the prince and his guests succumbed to the terrible disease. The clock stopped ticking, the fires went out in darkness and decay, and the Red Death triumphed over all. The Heart Doctor is a spooky story about a young girl who gets sick and her parents take her to visit the hospital. Melissa was a normal teenage girl. She was an only child and was living in a small town with her parents. She was studying in a normal school. She was a healthy child and seldom got sick until one day. Melissa was at home with her parents. She was watching TV when suddenly she started coughing up blood. She told her parents about it and they brought her to the nearest hospital. The doctor said, "What's wrong?" Her mother said, "My daughter is coughing up blood. Could you please help her?" "Of course," said the doctor with a smile. Then, the doctor brought Melissa to an examination room and told her he was going to do some tests. He told her parents to stay in the waiting room. They were hoping the doctor would find out what was wrong with their daughter and she would get well soon. After a while, the doctor came out and said, "I'm afraid to say this, but she has a problem with her heart." The parents were shocked when heard what the doctor said. The doctor said, "We can't let you stay here for a long time, but when we're finished, we will ask you to come inside to see your daughter. We hope you can understand." The parents said, "Yes, we can. We will wait here." The parents waited for the doctor to come out of the room. A few hours went by and they began to get worried. The doctor still hadn't come out. So the parents went inside and they were horrified by what they saw. Their daughter's body was lying on the bed, in a pool of blood. Her chest had been sliced open and her heart was missing. They could see the bloody bones in her ribcage. The doctor was nowhere to be seen, the window was open and the curtains were fluttering in the breeze. The parents called the police right away. The police questioned the parents and found them innocent, but they were never able to track down the Heart Doctor. He is still on the loose.